Hello, welcome to episode 5 of Terrace Talk. I'm Connor Southwell, and I'm delighted to say that finally, after 5 weeks of this particular video series, we get to talk about a Norwich City win, although we're not quite sure how you say Dennis Shrabeni's name, or is it Sabini or Shrabeni or whatever you want to call him. I'm joined by 2 new guests. We haven't ventured out this week. I've got a bit of a cold, so we thought we'd stay in for my sake. Don't worry about getting too close to me. I'm hoping we'll be okay. On my right, Andy Head, my football writer. Andy, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Connor.
Are you buoyed after a Norwich City win?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you can feel the difference just around anybody you speak to regarding the football. A win makes all the difference.
It does feel like the city's been a bit more positive this week, I think, when I've walked around it, despite the weather.
Absolutely, yeah. No, there's always a bounce effect in the city when we win, and equally, it's gloomy when we lose.
And Ben, archive editor at Archant. First and foremost, talk us through your role. You must have seen some lovely parts of Norwich City history, I'd imagine.
Of course. Well, as you mentioned, I'm the archive editor here, and I'm in charge of the local Recall project, which is a Google-backed initiative to digitise the Eastern Daily Press. So I spend a lot of my time either in the archives or working with the old stories, and to revisit those iconic moments through time, but also read the reader letters and the opinion pieces that come with that, and actually gauge, well, what was the spirit of the time. That's a very privileged position, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely is. And let's speak about the spirit of now. How are you feeling after that win on Saturday? A bit more optimistic about Norwich City's prospects?
So relieved. I think it was an uplifting experience to sort of see the team pull together and click a lot more, and it was a great experience. Yeah.
Is that for you the overall thing, relief? Because I've seen a fair few people who have said they feel relieved after this win. It almost feels like it kick-starts momentum again and hopefully gets people a bit more optimistic about what this season can bring for Norwich City.
Of course, I think we'll all confess that we felt quite despondent with some of the results recently. I mean, it's hard not to when you're suffering several defeats, and not only defeats, but defeats without any goals, and that is a wearing thing to go through. So yes, I feel much more positive and upbeat about things now after that, for sure.
Lovely. We will dissect the Everton game more in a moment. I'm just going to start though this episode by asking you guys a few quick fire questions about your I suppose your fanhood of Norwich City. Is there any one of you who wants to volunteer to go first? No, let's go with Andy first then. Right, I've got a list of questions for you here. They shouldn't be too tasking. They should be okay. We'll see if you can get through them. So, first and foremost, where do you sit in the ground?
I sit in the Upper Barclay now, simply because I've got my 10-year-old son who's now got his season ticket, and I spent 20 years in the Lower Barclay, a beautiful position just behind the goal, but of course he can't see at that level, so I've had to go upstairs where it's a bit quieter, but where he can actually get a view of the ground.
Yeah, you get a better tactical view on things. That's what we'll say. You've sort of answered my second question of who do you go to football with. Obviously, you go with your son. And how's he enjoying this season then? Is he enjoying it more than others? Has he seen Norwich team in the Premier League before?
Not in the Premier League before, no. His first season was Daniel Farke's first season, and so it was quite a disappointing one in terms of home games, because we didn't do an awful lot at home in that season, but last season obviously made up for it, and this season certainly the Man City game, he was as animated as I've ever seen him.
Absolutely. And what was your first game as a Norwich fan?
1984, Aldershot at home in the third round of the Milk Cup.
Great memory.
A 0-0 draw, and I remember it more for the fact that they served chicken in a basket in the boxes, executive boxes at the time that my dad got me into. So that was my abiding memory, was chicken in a basket.
Oh, brilliant. Let's have your favourite game then. Of all the games you've seen as a Norwich City fan, what one stands out more than any other?
I'm going to have to say Aston Villa in the 92-93 season, when we had taken that leap and it looked like we were so close. There was a real feeling in the ground that night that actually we can possibly do this. And the feeling of relief at the final whistle, I don't think I've ever felt anything quite like it. Close with the Man City relief, but the Villa one tops it for me.
Lovely stuff. Let's have your favourite niche player then, perhaps a player who people wouldn't anticipate who's been your favourite, who perhaps we wouldn't categorise as a club legend.
I always had a really strong feeling for Kai Kamara, who I know a lot of people criticised him in his goal-scoring record, but when you compared it to other strikers under Chris Hughton, nobody scored goals under Chris Hughton. And Kai Kamara always had that little something about him, that little edge. There was a little bit of magic about him. And I was really disappointed we didn't get him back and just see how things progressed.
Lovely. And finally then, we know footballers are fairly superstitious people. Fans are as well. Have you got any pre-match rituals that you abide by before you go to Carrow Road?
I really don't, to be honest. No.
I think you're the first person we've had who doesn't have one.
I'm one of those. I remember at one point I had a lucky badge or something like that when I was a kid, and it stopped working, and I binned that off, and then since then I've just not bothered.
A lucky badge, that'll do me. There you go. That's your 6 quick fire questions. It wasn't too testing, was it? I don't think. Ben, let's go with you then. Same set of questions. Whereabouts do you sit in the ground?
I sit in the Lower Barclay in the A block, right next to the Snake Pit.
Lovely stuff. Who do you go to football with?
I go with my dad, so I've been going with him for years and years.
Well, that leads me on to nicely. And first game, what was your first one? Can you remember it?
Oh, just about. I was, I believe, 5 at the time, and I think it was a home game against Watford. And it's what stands out for me from it was that we had a goal disallowed, and I can remember as a young lad I was devastated because what I thought was going to be a win was cruelly snatched away from me, and yeah, so that stands out definitely.
There we go, all them years after we're talking about VAR and you're talking about your first game there and a goal disallowed. Let's have your favourite game then. What's your favourite game, one that stands out in your memory?
When we beat Manchester United 2-1 at home a couple of Premier League trips ago, I mean that was a great moment to see us kind of topple a giant. That was the standout one for me.
Lovely, and let's get your favourite niche player then, perhaps someone who other fans wouldn't necessarily appreciate as much as you do, someone you have a bit of a soft spot for.
Well, my first football shirt that I ever got was Darryl Russell, and because he was a big hero of mine. He was a bit of a bruiser. He often would have the red mist descend, and I think I quite enjoyed that. So yeah, he was an entertaining player to watch for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Remember him well in that Paul Lambert season all those years ago at the start of the decade. And let's get your pre-match rituals then. Have you got anything you do religiously before kick-off? Or like Andy, are you another one who doesn't have really anything?
Well, because I spent 6 years in the States and I got used to watching the game very early in the day if I could find a stream, I got into the habit of having a big cooked breakfast. And so if I was going to host if I managed to convince some poor Americans to come and watch the game with me at stupid o'clock in the morning, I would put on a big breakfast to kind of make up for that fact. And so yeah, big cooked breakfast, that's my go-to ritual. What
does the breakfast include? Are we talking the works here, eggs, sausages, bacon?
Everything, sausages, bacon, hash browns, eggs, beans, tomatoes. You got to go hard or go home.
A football given to you, cholesterol.
Yeah, that's a footballer's diet, that one, isn't it? Right, let's move on there. As I said at the top of the show, we finally get to talk about a Norwich City win, which has been quite nice this week. Goodison Park, I don't think either of you were there, but obviously you've both seen the highlights. Andy, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on that? A massive win for Norwich City in a time that they probably needed it most, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the result is absolutely huge, and the confidence of keeping that clean sheet as well can't be underestimated. The way that the lads set up looked initially like it was going to be quite defensive with the two defensive midfielders, but obviously the movement, that little movement between the midfield and the attacking midfield was suddenly back again. There was links again to Timu Pukki, who had looked really, really isolated in recent weeks. And obviously Kenny Mcclain did well. Onel Hernandez is now back in full flow. So I think the result all round was huge, but also you've got to factor in that just how much better we played as a unit.
Yeah, that's it. Obviously, Everton are where they are at the moment and perhaps not enduring the best run in form in the league. Obviously, question marks over Marco Silva, who, as we record this, is still in post. Looks like he's going to be for the weekend as well. They've obviously got a tough run of games. I've got a few names listed down here in terms of preparation. I was thinking Kenny Mcclain. Obviously, you've got Christoph Zimmermann's influence perhaps more than his performance. But how much better were Norwich defensively? Because it seemed a much more, as you alluded to there, a much more well-drilled unit. And in recent weeks, they have been conceding a lot of chances and a lot of shots. Absolutely.
I mean, I don't recall that many Everton opportunities that were certainly in terms of being clear-cut opportunities. Tim Krul made a couple of saves, but didn't have to overly exert himself. It wasn't his busiest afternoon of the season, and the back four all looked solid. Sam Barham had another good game coming in at left back, not his natural position, but he's certainly perfectly capable of covering that on a prolonged basis potentially. And then with that little sitting to of Tribal and Tetty, we really did look like much more solid in the middle. We weren't going to be taken apart the way we were in previous games, the Villa game where we had Mcclain and Leitner, and we looked really outweighed in the middle there. Obviously that didn't happen on this occasion.
And after the Watford game, Ben, that's the response I think everyone needed, isn't it?
It definitely was, and as you've alluded to, having a solid unit to work with in the middle of the park was, I think, a very noticeable shift in the dynamic of our game. I think we had, and I think there is also a psychological boost that I felt amongst the players where we had two defenders who are mentally prepared as two defenders, and to have that as the foundation, I think the midfield felt that they had not that we couldn't trust Amadou and Tete as centre-backs, but there was that faith in what was behind them, so they felt more confident moving forward, and that was a really noticeable shift in the mentality of the team, and it was refreshing to see.
Yeah, I think it was the first time since August that Daniel Farkas had two centre-backs available. Christoph Zimmermann, of course, returning from injury. How big was he in terms of that win? It just felt like, as you said, he contributed to a much more solid base that perhaps Norwich haven't had.
It was a solid base, and it was a solid base that was willing to get gritty. They were willing to play, they were willing to throw themselves behind the ball, they were willing to kind of move up and push and press the attacks that Everton made, because I think we had them under the thumb for quite a lot of the first half, and when they came back onto the pitch they were slightly resurgent, and I felt that there was more conviction in how they moved forward and attacked us, but we defended well against that, and that was great.
Absolutely. Let's speak about Kenny Mcclain then. He's an interesting case because I think throughout this season he's not really found a natural place in that Norwich City midfield. Suddenly we see him as a number 10 and he's winning knockdowns, he's supporting Timu Pukki, he's breaking through the lines, he's looking like a completely different footballer.
Absolutely. I mean, I've always felt with Kenny Mcclain that he's never quite got that individual place of his, as you alluded to. With Alex Tetty, you can see he is that midfield anchor. With Mo Leitner, he's that metronomic passer. Kenny Mcclain kind of is a jack of all trades. He's very good at everything, but not one of those that I think many fans, if you would ask them to name their ideal 11 when everyone's fit, he may be one of the ones that misses out simply by not standing out in any particular area. But I think pushing him up there gave him that license to just play with freedom. He didn't have to have as many defensive responsibilities, and he was able to go in there, fill in those holes, and he's an intelligent footballer. And I thought it was quite noticeable, certainly with the first goal, but 2 or 3 times in the first half that Zimmermann or one of the defenders would occasionally play a ball into that little channel between Holgate and Lucas Digne, who are both, not the biggest players in the world. And I hadn't really noticed Mcclain's aerial ability before, but it was striking how often he won balls. I think the statistic after the match was that he'd won more aerial challenges than anybody on the pitch. Yeah. And when you consider Yerry Mina's on the pitch and he's a mountain, it says a lot for how well Mcclain found those spaces. And obviously, I can only assume it's a Daniel Farke tactic to have played balls into that area, let him go up and try and win some headers and win some possession up the field.
I think it was 7 more aerial duels than anyone else on the pitch on Saturday, which just goes to show his influence. How big was he for the Norwich City attack? Because it seems like Norwich have been a bit disjointed recently in terms of trying to retain that attacking edge they showed in the Championship, but equally trying to firm things up a bit defensively, and they've sort of been stuck in between the two. And on Saturday we had an example where they scored 2 goals and kept a clean sheet. This was the perfect away performance.
It was indeed, and there was definitely a lot more cohesion in how we moved up the pitch, and again, like you said, Mcclain was putting in a great shift there, and I think even with the way that people were connecting up to Pukki and the way that they were reading where they should be positioning themselves, and just the clinical passes were much more accurate. I think with some of the poorer performances that we've seen in the last few weeks, there have been some quite frustrating schoolboy errors where passes have been sloppy, they've been behind players, and actually that we seem to have sort of thrown that aside and actually gone back to the confidence that we had before. And so Mcclain, his ability to be freed up and actually play more of an expansive game was very noticeable.
We did see, at least in my opinion, a bit more of a sacrifice of Norwich playing out from the back at all costs. I mean, we've just spoken about Kenny Mcclain, how good he was aerially. There were a lot of clip balls into him, which was a bit of a change from what we've seen. Yeah. As fans, is that a philosophy you're happy to abide by? Of course, we've heard Stuart Webber say, look, Plan B is making Plan A better. Is this just an adaptation of what they've been doing before in order to try and find a Premier League formula?
I'm just happy to see a bit more pragmatism. I think that being able to recognise that teams had a better handle on what we were trying to do, and the way that we really depended on Buendia and Pukki and putting our attacks through there. If we can actually adapt to that and sort of change things up, I think I would prefer to have pragmatism rather than necessarily changing the game and the mentality 100%, and that I feel that we recognise that with Everton.
Interesting. Let's strip this back then, because I think a lot of Norwich City fans will be going, this win is because Christoph Zimmermann has returned and they've got two naturally fit centre-backs. Is it a bit more complex than that for you?
I think definitely. I mean, don't get me wrong, having Christoph Zimmermann there is a huge thing for us. It does give us that base to play off, as we said earlier. It gives the players in front more confidence in going forward, because you know that the back door is shut. But no, there were a lot of factors that came into that. I think Daniel Farke had a very good game plan. I think tactically we were very astute. It was pragmatic. It wasn't the flowing football. It wasn't Buendia bells and whistles kind of football. But it was there was a clear game plan to attack some of the weaknesses in Everton, and obviously the longer we kept them quiet in the game, the longer the game went on and they hadn't scored, the more you could see that this could be Norwich's day. And Zimbo was great, but there was so much more that went into that performance. So many players had really, really good games. Yeah,
absolutely agree. I think it was almost like his presence had sort of was noticed as well, and the fullbacks were a bit more free. Let's move on then to almost like a cult hero who's emerged out of this weekend, the icon, Dennis Sabine, however we're pronouncing his last name. Obviously coming on and scoring a goal. How pleased were you for him? Because he's been a bit of an understudy, been a bit in the shadows recently. I think it was something like 27 minutes of Premier League football this season. It was nice to see him score a goal, wasn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's one of those things that he's been, quietly getting on with things in the background. He's always there supporting the other lads, and he's one of those that you think, well, he's always just going to be a bit part player. But to be fair, every time he's come on pre-season, every time he's had a few minutes here and there, he's always added something to the game. There's always a little X factor that comes into the things when Dennis Sabine comes on, and for that you're just delighted for him to get a goal. Even if that's the pinnacle of what he does in his Norwich time, and I hope it's not, but even if it is, at least he's come, he's scored in the Premier League, and it's a fantastic story from obviously starting from quite a low level in Germany. So. Yeah,
that's exactly what I was going to come on to say. I think it was Dan O'Hagan, wasn't it, at the weekend, who tweeted 3 or 4 years ago he's playing in the 4th tier against Red Bull Leipzig's second team. Does it show how important he is for the squad if you look at social media and you look at the celebrations in the aftermath of his goal? And we've got a few pictures in front of us here in terms of how the players were celebrating with him and how pleased they were for him. That says a lot about his character, I think.
It definitely does, and I think it shows how we do have a depth to our squad. I know that a lot of focus has been placed on the hole at the back, which has been incredibly frustrating and challenging for the team. But when we look at players like Srebeni coming on, who can get that goal, and then there is that clear jubilation amongst the players and also the fans that travelled there that he's scored that important goal. I think it's a very reassuring sight, and we all want our players to do well. We don't want our players to lambast and struggle, do we? So I think it is an uplifting thing for there to be success from the subs bench and in the first team as well.
Lovely stuff. Finally on Everton then, we could sit here and talk about probably any of the 11 who played at Goodison Park. Is there one that we haven't discussed who stood out for you?
I mean, even though he missed a couple of chances, I think Byron did quite well. I think as a player stepping into a role where he isn't the first choice player, to actually go with some conviction and to try and still playing an attacking game, perhaps dropping some defensive duties in the process. But I like that confidence, because for me it captured that spirit of the game that we were playing last year, when we really were playing with flair and confidence, and that captured that for me. So yeah.
So, Andy, anyone else you want to give an honourable mention to before we move forward?
Definitely Onel Hernandez, because I think there were times when he was taking on 2 or 3 defenders. He was going through, and these are experienced Premier League defenders, and obviously, as we've already said, they're not the biggest in the bunch, but on the ground they're individually very good players. He was making monkeys out of them at times. He was just dribbling around, and there was very little they could do to stop him. And that, I think, that bodes really well coming in to the next few games, because obviously we know there's about to be a step up in quality in the next few in a few games' time anyway. And I think to have him on the form he's on at the moment is going to be big for us.
Yeah, interesting. We were actually speaking about Hernandez in the office today in terms of his influence. Everyone sort of spoke about how big he was going to be before he came back, and then he sort of came back and it's almost dried up a little bit in terms of what he's offered. I'm amazed neither of you mentioned Todd Cantwell, who of course scored the first goal. So we'll give an honourable mention to Todd. Too obvious.
You guys have done that.
Absolutely, yeah. Brilliant for Todd as well. I think that was his first away goal in senior English football or something was the stat. So great for him. Let's look forward then. Sunday, completely different prospect. Arsenal come to Carrow Road. Benny, are you feeling confident, or at least a bit more confident now after that Everton result?
I mean, if there was a time for us to be playing Arsenal, this is when I would want to play them. So I think we could really quite upset the apple cart of their season, and who knows, we could even topple a manager. I don't know. But yes, I think we will get a good result, but I don't think we'll get the win. I'm going to say a 2-2 draw would be the result that I would go for.
I think we'd all take a point, wouldn't we? It's worth noting as well, Unai Emery under significant amount of pressure. Marco Silva obviously is as well. I think Ralph Hasenhüttl, if you can say that, is also. So Norwich are now embarking on a period really where they've got 3 games against managers who are seemingly under pressure. How big of a factor is that going to be in Sunday's game, or is it for you going to be an Arsenal team who are almost going to be trying to prove their cause to their manager, and also I suppose potential new managers if we're looking beyond the horizon?
I think they will be out to prove that they can bring things back from the brink, but actually I think with the way there's been quite a lot of public negativity from fans, I think that at the moment they are wobbling, and I think if we can just replicate what we did against Everton, make sure that we're strong at the back and build on that, I think we can give as good as we can get, and we'll be in good stead for that.
Andy, do you agree? Is this the perfect time to play Arsenal?
Oh, I think, yeah, we're not going to get a better time. I think, having looked back through what Arsenal have been doing in recent matches, I don't think they've settled on a formation. I think they seem to be going from a back 4 to a back 3, and certainly watching the highlights from the weekend, there was, as Southampton scored their first, obviously it was that quick free kick that took them all by surprise. And the one player that sort of stood out to me at the time was Guendouzi, who's one of the younger players you would think, despite negativity around, would still have that passion to keep going. Not one of the sort of seasoned pro who's already thrown his cards in. But he was just jogging very gently back, and then there was a beautiful picture behind the goal when Southampton took their penalty, which was obviously initially saved, and then the rebound was put away. And it was the picture was taken with facing onto the goal, and you saw Guendouzi with his hands on his hips as the ball was struck, and with his hands on his hips as the follow up was put in, and he hadn't moved an inch, and then you started to see the hands come out as if to say, why didn't you get him? And that's your job, mate. That's what you're there for. And if that's not a sign of a dressing room that's starting to give up, then I don't know what is. And the various players didn't look at it on that match on Saturday. Whether there'll be a reaction to that, whether they will get themselves back into gear for the sake of Unai Emery. We'll see on Sunday, but it doesn't look like a happy place to me at the moment, and I think it's definitely the right time for us to play them.
They always seem like they are a little bit in crisis, don't they, Arsenal? I feel, of course, playing in the Europa League on Thursday as well. This, to me, almost feels like another Manchester United moment. I suppose we could package it in terms of a team come in who obviously a big side who've lost their way slightly, haven't picked up a result. United hadn't picked up a result. I think it's still only their first win in 11, isn't it, on the road or something like that, at Carrow Road. This is a massive opportunity for Norwich, and after the momentum they've built at Everton, confidence will be back in the side, you would imagine, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I think the players will be looking at this and thinking, if we're on it today, we could get a result here. Before Everton, that probably wouldn't have been the case, but now they'll be looking at it and thinking this is one where we can do ourselves proud, and actually, it's going to be seen by a lot of people. It's going to, our families are going to be watching this one because it's such a big game. And I think that's always a good, positive thing going into a game like this, where you actually feel like you've got a chance to knock off one of the big boys.
Absolutely, some nice memories of Norwich playing Arsenal in recent years. I think the last Premier League game at Carrow Road ended 1-1. Lewis Grabban scored. I had to do some frantic research and couldn't remember anything about that game. I was one I've erased from my memory. We had the League Cup game at the Emirates a couple of years ago. Some nice memories of playing Arsenal. How confident are you feeling? And do Norwich need to stick with the style that they showed they could do at Goodison Park, or is it about adapting again to a different opponent?
As I mentioned, I think making sure that we maintain that defensive cohesion in that central block would be a great start. But also with these teams that are floundering, whether it's Man United, whether it's Arsenal, they still have the big ticket players who are going to cause you problems if you give them the space and the ability to play the game that they want to. And we are playing against squads that are several times more valuable than our own, and I think, not that you can always tie anything to a monetary value, but there are some class players that will cause us problems if we let them. So I think starting with that leadership and that sense of dogged determination at the back will be good, but I think then we can still build on that, because with the Southampton goals, I mean, there were times where Arsenal were made to look pretty poor on the back foot, and I think we should, if we can replicate what we do at Everton but still maintain that pragmatism, we will give them a good game.
Yeah, you almost preempted my next question. I was going to ask you about players like Aubameyang, Lacazette. These are players who still cost vast sums of money. So whilst we're talking about an Arsenal side who perhaps aren't performing in the way they would like to, certainly their fans would like to, they still have players capable of winning matches on their own.
Certainly, and especially with some of the creative flair up top, like the two players you just mentioned, Aubameyang, Lacazette.
Pepe as well, £78 million reportedly.
Indeed. They are the players that can change games, and it just takes one cracker from 30 yards to completely turn a game. And I think Norwich I would like to think, would have the sort of the psychological resolution to deal with those when if they arise. But yeah, if we can, I think if we can play as well from the back as we did against Everton, we will still be able to soak up some of that pressure.
Fingers crossed, guys. Thank you very much. Let's just finish actually finally by getting your score predictions. Everyone seems to love them or hate them. There's a divide with score predictions. I don't know where you guys sit, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How do you see this one going?
My head says a 1-1, but I'm going to go with my heart, and I'm going to go 2-1 Norwich.
Who are you going to score the goals? Another one for Sir Benny?
We'll leave Big Den to one side just at this point in time.
He's had his moment.
He could have had his moment. I'm hoping, obviously, Timu Pukki getting back on the goal track would be great. I'd love Kenny Mcclain to get one just to reward him for his performance last week as much as anything. I think it would be a nice way for him to then come into that kind of frame as Pukki's backup, shadow striker, whatever you want to call him.
Lovely. Ben, what are your thoughts on this game? How do you see it going?
I think I mentioned earlier I jumped the gun a little bit, but I think it'll be a 2-2 draw, but I think we'll possibly make it hard for ourselves and maybe go a couple down before we claw it back. I don't know why I'm saying that, but it's just my gut instinct. And I'd like to see Pukki get on the score sheet, and actually Hernandez, as he's he's put in some good shifts recently, and I think he's an incredibly creative player. I'd like to see him get a goal too.
Amazing what a win can do, isn't it? You ask score predictions and they're both not predicting Norwich to lose now. I don't think we'd have been in the same position a week ago, but we'll certainly take it. Andy, Ben, thank you very much. And of course, if you'd like to appear on Terrace Talk, then make sure you read the description. We'll put all the relevant links on how you can get involved and sit where these guys are currently sitting in future weeks as well, to have your say on Norwich City. But here's hope that next week we're doing this video again and we're talking about another epic Norwich City result. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you leave a like and a comment as well as to how you see this game going. Subscribe to the Pink and YouTube channel as well, and we'll see you in the aftermath of Arsenal.